welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the creator of a beautiful graphic novel who has done many, many interesting things, and I am so curious about how they all come to bear on this project that I am so excited to discuss. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Hi there, thank you for having me. My name's Olivia Sullivan, and my book is called Oracles. It's about grief, loss, spirituality, the absurd, and overwhelmed with societal expectations.
It is such a beautiful meditative journey, and I really love the way that the comic does a lot of really interesting things with time as you are reading it, because it's a slim volume, but I spent a long, long time with it. The page to time looking at page ratio is very, very good. So before we get too much into the comic, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your career, your other works, and your journey toward this project.
Primarily I'm an illustrator. I'm based in the UK. I work on album covers, video games, comics. I studied at Camberwell College of Arts in London, which is part of the University of Arts umbrella. And then I went on and did a master's in information experience design at the Royal College of Art. And that kind of opened up a new realm of experimental artwork that then I put back into my comic work, which is why my comics aren't wholly conventional in the way that they're laid out and the way that I use words. I'm inspired by Mobius, Jack Kerouac, David Lynch, even a bit of Henry Rollins, and also I'm inspired by a lot of music like Fiona Apple, Lana Del Rey, and PJ Harvey. So it all informs me and inspires me and my work. So
Wow, that's a beautiful set of inspirations. That's just a I'm really curious about how experimental design comes to bear on this project, as you've already discussed a little bit. I'm really interested in your panel layout, such as that is. It's very, what's the word I'm looking for? Eclectic, in that you do have some pages that are sort of a traditional, grid, and there are some that sort of like bust that traditional grid wide open and do some really interesting things with space and panel lines and boundaries. Can you talk a little bit about how that experience shaped Oracles?
Well, I'd like to think that as much as I tried in my youth to create like conventional comics, and I did for certain like projects that we set at university, I just didn't fall in love with how rigid it can be. I like parameters because I do believe too much freedom is it can be an impediment, but I do feel that playing around with panels just opens up so much more. I think comics can be so much more than the rigid boxes that people normally see it as. And especially with my work, a lot of it's quite, it's like a journal, it's like poetry, it's a diary. And I think I want the panels to reflect that. Some days in a journal, you'll have one line. So maybe I'll have one page of a panel. And other days, you're going to have this maybe a fairly nice edited piece, a stream of consciousness, and you want to kind of orchestrate that in a more uniformed way. So I like to go backwards and forwards. And as you mentioned with time, the elements that I'm playing with were oracles. It's almost like this timeless sense. Like once you have grief and loss in your life, you do feel like you've lost your sense of time and space. And that's how I wanted the panels to kind of be like.
Could you talk about how you use color to do some of that as well? Because I love the way that you have some, full color pages with pretty vivid colors, and then there's a lot of saturated colors as well, and then some very limited palettes. What guided those choices?
Oh, color is a really important part of my work, and it's a main thing that people do comment on, like my color palettes and my choices. So I'm glad you asked that question. For oracles in particular, I wanted to play around with the idea of having like one palette, like a kind of sepia tone, kind of to represent like the everyday, and then elements of like bursts of full color. Because I do find that, as we live our lives, we have our like, mundane colors, and then we do have these sparks of color when we're really happy, we have a good event. So I kind of wanted to emulate that. And also time as well, like those sort of brown, beige tones make you feel like you're in the past as well. So yeah, I wanted to play around with color a bit more on this one, and make it a bit more intentional.
Mm. One of the things that it really highlighted for me was the sort of, I guess, the non-linear nature of grief and healing, and how some days feel kind of normal, and you feel engaged with the world. And some days you feel very isolated and separate from it and weighed down. And it almost does, in my experience, it can almost affect your literal vision in a way, because you are and how you perceive things.
Yeah, definitely. And with this book, it was a lot about grief to come, from a personal perspective. I've always had this fear, and like most people have this fear, human beings, of losing our loved ones and what impact that will have in our lives, and almost not conceiving it. And once I've finished writing my script, it was all signed off from the publisher. I was doing my thumbnails. We had a shock loss in our family of my auntie, and that just brought back so much more. It just changed my whole perception of the book as well. I was able to like add a few more things in where I was really sitting with this grief that was now realized. Also dealing with grief of milestones in life. I find myself, I have a different path in life, like many artists do, and many people my age in this world where, you know, um, we can't afford a lot, you know, everyone's getting married and having kids, and you're like, oh, where do I fit in this? Everybody else in my family or friends are, and you just feel a bit lost. So there's grief in that, a grief in the life that either you were promised or you're supposed to have. So there's a lot of elements of grief and loss that I play around, and loss of romantic relationships and things like that.
Mm. It's so interesting too, because there's something paradoxical about grief, because you're absolutely correct about everything you've just said. And I think there's a lot of, grief in your age range, a lot of grief for the world. I certainly feel it too. That does feel like it's happening now and is like a sort of preemptive, grief for the future. And there's this paradox in there that like the world causes your grief, but it will also provide you your healing journey, and I think that's
Yes.
in the landscapes that our narrator visits as well. Mhm.
Yes, definitely. That is what I wanted to show, is that in like spiritual practices, which I have gone to for comfort, I'm not wholly religious, but I respect everything that anyone has to say that I can resonate. And spiritual speakers like Ramdas, elements of Buddhism and Bhakti Hinduism, and a lot of it is like thinking of how presence is important, and nature provides that better than anything. You go outside, a tree is a tree, and it is content as it is, and it's almost just taking that time to absorb and just feel like I'm not the whole universe. Nature goes on regardless, and that's not in a nihilistic way, it's an uplifting way to be like, the universe will carry on, the world will carry on. Not that it is always uncaring, it's nurturing, but it's in a way in which it's like, no, you are resilient, nature is resilient, and you will continue. And that's why the narrator goes through these different biomes and different ecosystems. And as well, there is a bit of like a climate mention there, with like climate change and how we should respect nature. um it is our world, it is our life source, and it is our healer. So
Mm. How did you choose your landscapes, and how were those choices guided by the emotions that you wanted to depict? I hope that made sense as a question.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like I use the landscapes almost as like chapters and different portals and gates opening for the character to meet new characters, new emotions, new situations. So the woodland for me, is definitely, I think it's like that bridge between, say, like reality, and then you're stepping, you can live in a city and maybe half an hour to an hour away there's like woods nearby, and it, for me, it's like that bridge of connecting to nature and stepping into the unknown. And then as you're going further and further in, you're losing yourself, and then, you know coldness can happen, and then you end up in the mountains, and then you feel like isolated, and there's like desolation. um but then also I wanted to show like warmth of the desert as well. I wanted to contrast that, but how desolate the mountainous areas are and how desolate the desert are. It's like those emotions where you can be alone and cold, but you can be alone and also like surrounded by people. It's like a playing with loneliness and landscapes and how that feels, and temperature. And then also things like the ocean, which is really interesting to me, how like most of it is undiscovered, and the depths of the ocean it is quite scary to me, and it also that represents the unknown. So I wanted to play with environments to emotions and spiritual journeys.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very expressionistic and almost romantic, like with a capital R, that's sort of like relationship between our emotions and the nature of the landscapes around us. And the way that these landscapes segue with the color and suggest a really an emotional journey that is both sort of like abstract and undescribable, but very material and something that everybody can resonate with because unless you're very lucky, like everybody has lost something at some point in their
Yeah.
lives. And even if every grief journey is utterly unique, there are touchstones in it, I think, that resonate with people.
Yeah. I think it's just trying to present that, yeah, that you aren't alone, even though it's so cliche to say that, because people say that when you're going through something, like this will pass, you're not alone, but it doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
when people are saying those things to you at the time, you're just like, oh, that's the last thing I want to hear. Like you don't understand, whatever. But once you do go through it, you do end up becoming that person that is like, it will get better in the end. And it is about weathering the storm. That's the whole book, is about weathering this storm of like indecision, like what am I doing with my life, especially if you have someone in your family that's like the rock in the family, and that goes, and then you think, well, when that goes, I've completely lost. But it's also just showing that, if a person's raised you to become a certain way, and then you're just like, no, I will withstand this, because all the lessons that I've learned from them, like you kind of want to do them justice, you don't just want to give up. So I wanted to make sure that it was positive, and it wasn't just like, this narrator, this character running away from life. They've run away for a bit, but then they realize, home is not somewhere where you're far away from everyone. You've got to weather the storm, and you've got to get through it. And you get through it with people, I reckon.
Mm.
Nature and people.
Absolutely. And it is very, it does feel so isolating. And when you're going through it, it feels like you're the only person it has happened to, even though it is like one of the only things that is kind of guaranteed in life that you are going to experience at some point. And it really speaks to all of those paradoxes and all those complexities. And it presents a lot of, I think, really complicated feelings that it doesn't try to paper over or to idealize or romanticize too much. It presents the feelings very honestly, but it does make them beautiful and make them meaningful. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
no, that's great. Yeah. I think that's the thing when you're dealing with subjects like grief and loss, you want to be careful in how you present it. But I think that's mainly for people who are a bit detached from it. If you've gone through it and you're honest about it, then it will resonate with someone out there. And yeah, I just felt that it was like cathartic for me to get it all out on paper. But if it does connect to anyone, that's a great bonus. Yeah, that would be great if for people to relate to that. Um
Nice. Yeah, I'm very excited to share it with people at the library here. And I know that, comics take a long time and you're promoting this one right now, but are you working on anything? What's on your horizon right now?
On my horizon right now, I think it's delving into more experimental stuff and just gathering a lot of different examples of like visual cut-ups and collages, and yeah, seeing what my next iteration can be. Hopefully it's not with a subject that's as deep this time, but who knows. So it'll be a lot of more experimental play in writing and drawing, so I'm looking forward to seeing all the different materials and mediums that I can use to see what I come up with, but nothing at the moment. Just there'll be a lot of playing about, I think.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, I've often thought that, finishing a book feels like a lot of work, and then the starting gets to feel like play again, and you kind of feel
Yeah,
refreshed. And
exactly. Because even with an experimental book, it's like everything's come from. So how I did the book was how I basically do any project. It's a lot of like random notes in my journals, sketches from obviously like different nature reserves, things like that. And it's like connecting the dots in a way and finding a narrative through that. But then it still has to be somewhat polished. It still has to be presentable for people. So there is still that editing process that is quite crucial so that it is still palatable even though it's experimental. So yeah, there is a toning down, so you expand and then you start toning it all down to make it presentable, so it'll be starting that process again.
oh, that's very interesting. Do you think it kind of maps to, the play part when you are beginning is where you are sort of doing it for yourself, and then the work parts as you approach the end is when you start to have to think about other people like the publishers or audience or things like that, or
Yeah, because I would say initially like that was never a thought of mine, and it isn't when I'm creating it at first, but like with many like conventional writers, edits are important, because sometimes you can be in your own world and you have to step back and be like, it's still got to kind of make sense. Even though I like playing around with the nonsensical and the surreal, I still want to communicate as much as I can to people without hitting them over the head over a meaning. Because I want people to kind of experience things. You know how music is. You might have these lyrics, but some of the lyrics are quite ambiguous. And I want to have that element. I want people to experience it in their own way, but without it being too far out there.
Yes. Well, I think it's really lovely, and it's been really interesting to see inside your process and to talk to you about this book. Thank you so much for making the time for
Oh,
me.
thank you so much, Jen. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Listeners, please check out Oracles. It's absolutely beautiful. I think you will really love it. It's gorgeous and meditative, and it's a little bit sad, but it's ultimately very uplifting, I think, and it's a really worthwhile experience. So please check it out. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.